He had two numbers in front of him. One on the super statement, printed on Australian super letterhead, sitting open on the dining table in his unit in Parramatta. The other on a Services Australia letter that had arrived.
You've got
3
the wrong
days
guy.
earlier. He had looked at both
I want a
numbers
lawyer
separately
now.
dozens of times, but he had never looked at them together. And when he did, when he placed the two letters side by side on the table, his reading glasses pushed up, the afternoon light coming through the window, he saw something he had never seen before. The super number and the pension number were not independent. They were connected. One controlled the other. And nobody, not his employer, not his fund, not the government, had ever explained how. If you have ever looked at your super balance and your age pension entitlement as two separate things, stay with me, because today I am going to show you the link between them. It is one of the most important relationships in the Australian retirement system, and most people discover it too late. Let me start with the basic principle, because once you see it, everything else falls into place. When you reach pension age, 67 under current rules, Services Australia assesses your eligibility for the pension using two tests, the assets test and the income test. Your superannuation balance is counted in both. Not just counted. It is one of the largest single items in the assessment for most Australians. Your super is not invisible to Centrelink. The moment you turn 67, every dollar sitting in your super becomes part of the equation that determines how much pension you receive. Under the assets test, your super balance is a countable asset, the full amount, regardless of whether it is in accumulation phase or pension phase. If you are a single homeowner and your total countable assets, including your super, are below roughly $333,000, you receive the full age pension. Above that line, your pension starts to taper, reducing by $3 per fortnight for every $1,000 over the threshold. Now, here is where it gets genuinely interesting, and where most people have never had it explained clearly. Your super balance does not just affect the assets test, it also feeds into the income test through a mechanism called deeming.
The projections show your super providing a steady income for the next 20 years.
Does that account for market volatility?
Yes, we've factored in a conservative
estimate.
estimate.
Actually earning. They assume it is earning a set percentage, whether it is or not. Under current rules, the first $66,800 of your financial assets are deemed at 1.25%, and everything above that at 3.25%. I have done a full breakdown of exactly how deeming rates work and what they mean for your pension. It is worth understanding
getting the right exposure is critical, which brings me to the settings we used for this shot right here.
But let me show you what this looks like with a real example, because that is where the math stops being abstract and starts being personal. Picture a woman, 68, recently retired, living in her own home in Glenelg, Adelaide. She has $400,000 in super and $50,000 in a savings account. Her home is excluded from the assets test. Her countable assets total $450,000. Under the assets test, she is above the full pension threshold of $333,000 by about $117,000. At the taper rate of $3 per fortnight per thousand, her pension reduces by about $351 per fortnight. The maximum single pension is $1,200.90. So under the assets test, she receives roughly $850 per fortnight. Now, Centrelink also runs her numbers through the income test using deeming. Her total financial assets, super plus savings, are $450,000. The first $66,800 is deemed at 1.25%, which gives about $835 a year. The remaining $383,200 is deemed at 3.25%, about $12,450 a year. Total deemed income, roughly $13,285 a year, or about $511 per fortnight. The income-free area for a single person is $226 per fortnight. She is over by about $285. At the income test taper of 50 cents per dollar, her pension reduces by about $142 per fortnight. So under the income test, she receives roughly $1,058 per fortnight. Centrelink applies whichever test gives the lower amount. In her case, the assets test produces the lower figure, be about $850. That is what she receives, not the income test figure, not the maximum. The lower of the two, Now,
the next
here
service
is
to
where
London
most
King's Cross at
explanations stop,
9:04
but there
is
is
now
a
due to
second layer
depart
to
from
this that
platform
changes
8.
everything.
This
What if she restructured her finances slightly? What if, instead of holding $50,000 in a savings account earning almost nothing, she contributed some of that into super before she turned 67, when she still could? Or what if she had used the downsizer contribution to put the proceeds from selling a previous home into super before retirement? The total asset number might be the same, but the structure could change which test is binding and by how much. This is the part nobody explains. The structure of your retirement savings matters as much as the total. How much is in super versus outside super? Whether your super is in accumulation phase or pension phase. Which investment option your fund holds you in. These decisions affect the deemed income calculation, which affects the income test, which can change the pension you receive by hundreds of dollars per fortnight. And here is another layer. Once you start drawing an income stream from your super, an account-based pension, your super balance starts going down each year. The minimum drawdown rates require you to withdraw at least 5% per year between 65 and 74, 6% between 75 and 79, and it keeps stepping up from there. As your super balance falls, your countable assets fall, which means your age pension can actually increase over time. This is the design of the system. Super is meant to supplement the pension in the early years of retirement and then gradually give way to the pension as the balance decreases. But if you do not understand this interaction, you might make decisions that cost you. Holding too much in super when a slightly lower balance would push you under the full pension threshold. Or drawing too much too early and running down your super faster than necessary. We have walked through the real maths of how much super you actually need in our videos on retiring on $100,000 a year and $80,000 a year. And the results genuinely surprise people because the age pension changes the number dramatically. When you factor in what the pension contributes, the amount of super you need drops significantly compared to what the newspaper headlines suggest. Stay with me on this next part, because this is where the real money difference lives. There is something called the pension sweet spot, and it is not an official term, but it is the best way to describe it. The sweet spot is the asset range where you receive a meaningful part pension plus the pensioner concession card while still having enough super to supplement your income comfortably. For a single
that telemetry
homeowner,
reading is
that
unstable. Get me a confirmation from the backup system. Negative flight. The fluctuation is increasing. We need a decision
in
now.
In that range, you are receiving a part pension, perhaps $600 to $1,000 per fortnight, plus concessions on prescriptions, council rates, energy bills, and public transport that can add up to $2,000 or $3,000 a year. Below $333,000, you get the full pension, but your supplementary income from super is modest. Above $700,000, you're approaching the cutoff and receiving very little pension. The sweet spot is in between, and understanding where you sit in that range is one of the most valuable pieces of financial knowledge you can have heading into retirement. If you want to check where you stand, Services Australia has an estimator on their website, servicesaustralia.gov.au, and your super fund can tell you your current balance and projected drawdown. And if you are unsure about how to structure your finances heading into retirement, talk to a qualified, independent financial advisor, someone who charges a fee for advice, not a commission on a product. A good advisor can model different scenarios and show you how even small changes in structure can shift your pension entitlement by thousands of dollars a year. And here is something worth knowing. The cost of living is rising and the pension is indexed. But has it kept pace with what retirees actually experience at the supermarket and the chemist and the letterbox? There is a growing gap between the official inflation numbers and the lived reality of everyday expenses. That gap between pension indexation and the real cost of retirement is something we have unpacked step by step. Because when you see the numbers side by side, the story is more confronting than most people expect. So what we have covered today is this. Your super and your age pension are not two separate numbers. They are one equation. Every dollar in your super affects your pension calculation. The assets test, the income test, the deeming rates, they all take your super into account. And the structure of your retirement savings, not just the total, but how it is held and how it is drawn down, can shift your pension by hundreds of dollars per fortnight. But there is something else worth exploring. something that connects directly to what we have covered today. If the pension sweet spot sits between 300 and 500,000 in super, what does that mean for someone with 500,000? Can you actually retire on that amount and live comfortably? The answer depends on your pension entitlement, your expenses, and how you structure your drawdown. And it is something we will cover in full because the numbers are more encouraging than most people expect. If this helped make sense of something that felt confusing, share it with someone you know who is approaching 67 and has never placed their super statement next to their pension letter. Sometimes seeing those two numbers together for the first time changes everything. And I'm curious, have you ever checked how your super balance affects your pension entitlement? Or have those two numbers always felt like separate worlds? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and your questions genuinely shape what I cover next. Thumbnail moment. Two letters placed side by side on a dining table. One from Australian Super, one from Services Australia. A pair of hands resting between them, palms down, as if the person has just realised the two numbers are connected.
The list is getting worse. We have to wake the others. They won't listen. They think it's unsinkable.